Family reunion that turned incestuous and then deadly. Yeah, my thoughts exactly. Once again, it's Murder and Mayhem Monday. Welcome back. My name is Franklin James, the serial author, and I hope you all have a mayhem-less week. Now, today we'll be covering one of the most unsettling cases of familial tragedy in recent American history. It's a case about manipulation, obsession, and the fatal bonds between father and daughter. I'm talking about the incestuous story between Steven and Katie Pladl. But let's start at the beginning. Let's go back to 1995. There was a young girl who was a teenager named Alyssa Garcia who met a man named Steven Plato on the internet. She was 15 years old and he was 20. So it's possible even back then he had an affinity toward younger girls. And their relationship quickly turned serious and disconcerting. Alyssa would later say that Steven was controlling, abusive, and had disturbing tendencies. Yet, despite his alarming behavior, the two got married and had a daughter 3 years later in 1998. And their daughter's name initially was Denise, but later Steven would rename her Katie. But 8 months after their daughter Katie was born, Alyssa and Steven made a decision that would shape the horror to come. They gave Katie up for adoption, and their reasons were complicated. They were young, financially unstable, and Steven's behavior was increasingly disturbing. In fact, Alyssa admitted that she feared for her baby's safety. She said Katie would cry, which would just trigger Steven. She even described how Steven would pinch the baby and sometimes put the baby in a cooler, closing the lid. She said Steven Plato was a special kind of scary, so it was best to give their daughter up for adoption. So Katie was raised by the Fuscos, a loving family in Dutchess County, New York. A family completely unaware of the dark history that would soon come searching for their adopted daughter. Now, in 2016, Katie Fusco turned 18 and, like many adoptees, became curious about her biological parents. She reached out to Alyssa and Steven on social media and they reconnected. But by then, Steven and Alyssa were separated. However, Steven saw something in his daughter Katie, something twisted and unnatural. And Katie quickly moved in with her biological parents to reconnect. But soon things took a chilling turn. Alyssa, her biological mother, became uncomfortable. She noticed how Steven was becoming obsessed with Katie. He was sleeping on Katie's bedroom floor, which is odd. He'd buy her gifts, and apparently they were being intimate. He was even telling his two youngest daughters that Katie was more than their sister. Now, eventually, Alyssa moved out, but she had no idea what was about to happen. Months later, in the fall of 2017, Katie and Steven disappeared together, and then they reappeared in Knightdale, North Carolina, as husband and wife. They lied on their marriage license, listing themselves as not related. They even had a small ceremony with family present, whom were unaware or willfully ignorant of the truth. And by the end of 2017, Katie Plato was pregnant. Now in 2018, she gave birth to her baby boy, her son and half brother, Bennett. Yet by this point, their secret began to unravel, and Alyssa, Katie's biological mother, she discovered their incestuous relationship and reported it to the authorities. They were soon arrested and charged with incest, along with falsifying their marriage documentation. Now their baby, he was placed in the care of Steven's mother. Because Steven Plato was in jail and Katie moved back in with her adoptive parents. Katie Plato also made the decision to end her relationship with her biological father, a decision that Steven did not take well. In fact, that rejection set the stage for the horrific events that followed. Now, it was the early morning of April 12th, 2018, and at this point, Stephen Plato was out of jail. The police in Knightdale, North Carolina responded to a welfare check at Stephen Plato's home. And inside, they found something awful. They discovered the body of a 7-month-old baby, Steven and Katie's son, Bennett. He was dead in his crib. He had been suffocated. Just hours later, in Dover, New York, 20-year-old Katie and her adoptive father, Anthony Fusco, were shot dead in a parked car on a rural road. And just across the state line, in Riverhead, New York, Stephen Plato ended his own life with a gunshot to the head. So in one day, 4 lives ended. And then there's a baby that never even had a chance to live. Stephen Plato likely felt rejected and powerless, and I'm sure he was driven by rage. And that's why he became what's known as a family annihilator. Someone driven to violence due to the lack of control or familial rejection. And I'm sure he felt that way because Katie wanted to end their relationship. But now let's examine why it happened. Some psychologists and criminologists point to a phenomenon known as genetic sexual attraction, or GSA. It's a rare and controversial term used to describe an intense romantic or sexual attraction between biological relatives who meet for the first time as adults. But GSA doesn't justify manipulation, coercion, and violence. Stephen Plato had a long history of abusive behavior. He even groomed Katie. He was her father, not her equal. He isolated her from her adoptive family. And when she tried to leave, he responded the only way he knew how, with destruction. Their story, it wasn't about love. It was about control, obsession, and unfortunately, it ended in horror. Katie Plato was a victim twice. First of abandonment and confusion about her identity, then again, due to being groomed and controlled by the one man who should have protected her. Stephen Plato was a sociopath who left a wake of devastation. He left a mother grieving her daughter and grandson, a community shocked, and questions that may never truly be answered. This case reminds us of how deep the cracks in the human psyche can run, and how those cracks, when left unchecked, can lead to tragedy. But I do want to thank you all for tuning in, and I do ask that you stab that like button and subscribe. Leave a comment and let me know what you think about this tragic story. Share this video out there, hit that bell for notifications, and if possible, avoid mayhem.